Did you know that currently there are count them, 8 SEC teams ranked inside the top 25? I often hear complaints from fans of the Big 12 or the ACC, for instance, or the Pac 12 once upon a time, RIP, that the SEC cannibalizing itself shows the depth of the league, whereas other conferences doing it shows how weak those leagues are. There are times when those complaints are completely valid. Here's the issue. There's only one 3-loss team that is ranked at the moment. There will be at least one, maybe two after this weekend, depending on whether LSU beats Bama. One of those teams will have 3 losses, or really what I meant to say, and then I got crossed up saying my words there a bit, is whether Ole Miss is able to beat Georgia. Georgia has 1 loss, but Ole Miss has got 2. I'll talk about Ole Miss, LSU, and Bama in a little bit. But I came into this season thinking the SEC would get 4 teams into the college football playoff, and the AP voters have laid some groundwork here for just that, maybe even more. Now you may say, Spencer, the AP voters don't matter. I think in the history of the playoff committee, when you look at the rankings that they put out versus what the AP voters put out, teams aren't usually, I hope Indiana is an exception to this generalized rule here, teams aren't usually more than one or two spots off of their spot in the AP poll. There are usually a lot of similarities because you don't know every single person that votes on the AP or that votes for a college football playoff ranking, for instance, but they think very similarly. Whatever you think that mentality is, the people at the highest level seem to think pretty similarly about this sport. Whether it's a good thing or bad thing, I think that's just the way it is. So when I look at what they have done with the SEC, I think the AP voters have laid the groundwork for everybody. They've laid the groundwork. And now that the foundation's been put down, well, the College Football Playoff Committee can start putting up walls. They can put up a couple of retaining walls this week, and they can get some floor plans, and they can meet with the architect and really start to put this together to put not 1, not 2, not 3, not 4, but 5 teams from the SEC into the playoff. If you go into this particular ranking thinking, hey, could there really be that many teams alive? Well, it's pretty simple. There's a crazy tiebreaker scenario that could ensue if certain games go a certain way. I'm not worried about that right now. Those have a tendency to work themselves out. But the world that a lot of people would lament, but I'd say, why are you surprised, in which the SEC gets 5 teams into the playoff, it's right there in front of you. There are 3 top 10 teams. They can't all make the SEC championship game. And by the way, the ones that do are both going to the playoff. So there's going to be at least one, like the bare minimum the SEC gets into the playoff is 3. That is bare minimum. There is no world I can foresee, barring chaos unlike anything we've ever seen in the history of the sport, in which the SEC gets fewer than 3 teams into the playoff. So that's pretty easy. But here's where it starts to get complicated. If Texas continues to win, but loses to Texas A&M last week, the regular season, those teams will both be 10-2. Because Texas A&M has got a cupcake in Auburn before they play Texas, and they have a bye this week. So Texas A&M is sitting there at 7-2. Well, if they're 10-2 and Texas is 10-2, you think those teams are getting left out? Because Texas will be ranked in the top 5, which is where they are now, and they won't lose between now and then in this hypothetical. And Texas A&M will pick up a top 5 win. They'll move into the top 10. They're not going to drop Texas out of the top 10 for losing on the road to a team they're about to rank inside the top 10 as well. So then you'll have the easy path to 4. And then you just need one of LSU or Alabama, or dare I say Ole Miss, to also finish the season at 10-2. LSU and Alabama play themselves this week. It's going to be really fun. It is a night game. It is at Death Valley there in Baton Rouge. It's going to be phenomenal. The loser probably out of the playoff. That's just reality. You're going to have 3 losses, 9-3. I don't care if you're Big Ten or SEC. You're probably not getting in. Now, that's another one of those interesting things that I will be looking for as the playoff committee rankings are released on a weekly basis, starting with Tuesday night. But 9-3, hard to see, especially when for LSU, one of those losses is to USC, who are battling to be 500 this year. And for Alabama, one of those losses is to Vanderbilt, who, look, Vanderbilt's a pretty solid football team. Like, just call a spade a spade. Vanderbilt is a solid football team. They might lose this week to South Carolina. They also might win this week. I think winner of that game gets to be ranked inside the top 25. And if you're Alabama, you'd probably rather, I think, I'm not entirely sure. I think you'd rather have South Carolina win that game so that your win looks better rather than your loss. But I think you can argue that either way. Vanderbilt's got LSU and Tennessee to close the regular season, by the way, just in case you were thinking of chaos scenarios, because they're absolutely out there. So the world in which darn near half of the 12-team playoff is made up of the SEC, it's right there in front of your face. It is right. I mean, it could not be more readily apparent. That also depends on how they view. Like Ole Miss in the AP poll is ranked 16th. What if the playoff committee puts them at 13th? Oh boy, you'd have a problem. I don't think they would do that. But I'm just saying, what if they did? Do they really trust SMU? Are they going to put Boise State that high? What do they think about Notre Dame? They lost to Northern Illinois, for goodness sake. So the SEC, just as we all anticipated, set to dominate the playoff. 3 is the absolute bare minimum. I'm hard pressed to see a world where they don't get 4 and 5. It's right there to be had. It's right. The possibility is so incredibly real. By the way, just ponder this. What if Indiana beats Ohio State and Ohio State's 10-2, and suddenly they have to go up against resumes in the SEC? They'd have a road win at Penn State. Ohio State should be a big Penn State fan the rest of the year. You should be looking at Penn State saying, please beat Washington, Purdue, Minnesota, and Maryland. Minnesota's the toughest of those games by far, but don't sleep on Washington this week. I'm going to talk about that more later on today's show. It's craziness. It's craziness. It's going to upset a lot of you, but I'm just telling you, it's going to be right there. It's going to be right there. You're going to look at it and go, the SEC is going to run this thing. This stinks. Well, that's what you get in the 12-team playoff. It's what a lot of you wanted, and this is going to be the byproduct. But excited to see how that goes. Quick note here. Ole Miss, LSU, Bama, likely playing for their playoff lives. But likely. Not guaranteed. Nothing is guaranteed in this sport. The parity in college football is tremendous, and I think the transfer portal is the biggest cause for that. When you look at what Ole Miss has put together this year, I think of the 3 teams that would vie to be a 9-3 team in the college football playoff, they'd be the least likely to make it happen because they do have a road win at South Carolina 27-3. That's very good. Their road win at Arkansas last week, also pretty solid. Neither of those teams are actually ranked right now. So if the season ended today, if Ole Miss loses to Georgia, but they beat Florida, which I don't think is a given, and they beat Mississippi State, and they're 9-3, they'd have losses to Kentucky, LSU, who will still be ranked in some capacity, Georgia, and they would not have a current ranked win unless South Carolina works their way in the top 25. I think that's pretty weak. I think that's pretty darn weak. On the other side of things, LSU would have losses to Texas A&M, Alabama, unranked USC. They play Florida, Vanderbilt, Oklahoma down the stretch. I don't know that that's that strong either. Alabama's the interesting one. Because Alabama's got that win against Georgia, and that is looming incredibly large. Vanderbilt lost, boy, that's not ideal, but Alabama can certainly win their final 3 games after LSU. The question is, will the committee continue to respect a loss at Vanderbilt and at Tennessee? If they were to lose to LSU, all 3 of their losses would be on the road. How would those things get weighted? I don't know. Is the honest answer. But we are certainly going to find out. My gut tells me Ole Miss, LSU, and Alabama are playing for their playoff lives this week.